don't mess with China, don't mess with free trade.
Can you explain what China's ambitions globally might be and what the threat to Britain is?
So I do have concerns doing trade with certain kinds of companies in China, whether in fact it is going to be deleterious to the national security of Britain.
Maybe next time when I'm in London, we can have a cup of tea to help you to really be reoriented to the realities in China.
You might put the welcome mat out for me, but I'm afraid I've been sanctioned by the Chinese.
Hello and welcome to The Forecast. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy. My guests today are going to address the big question of the brewing trade war between the United States on one side and China on the other, with Britain sort of in the middle trying to work out where it sits. Victor Gao is a Chinese lawyer and academic. He's vice president of the Beijing-based Center for China and Globalization, and he's also a professor at Soochow University. Baroness Helena Kennedy is a Labour peer and an eminent human rights lawyer, and she's also co-chair of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, known as IPAC. Thank you for joining us. Victor, we've had a lot of people talking to us over the last few days warning that trade war can lead to real war. Do you think that's true?
Of course, if you look back to the 1920s and 1930s, trade war and tariff war, etc., combined together may eventually push the situation in the direction of war or even global war. So I think we all need to do the right thing. And the right thing for today is to protect free trade and don't allow any country, no matter how big it is, how powerful it is, to trample upon the rules of free trade and hold a gun at the head of mankind. That's not going to work because it may lead the whole world into a war or a global war.
But what does that mean in real terms? Because you can't tell Donald Trump what to do. So, the world has little impact on him when it comes down to it. So, what do you mean? You can't let one person hold a gun when he's got his trade policy. That's what he's doing.
I would say the United States right now is holding a gun at so many countries' head and issuing ultimatum, forcing them to do what they may or may not believe is in the best of interest of all so many countries. In a sense, this is trampling on free trade. And if you really destroy free trade, then you will live in a completely different world. Rule of the jungle will prevail, and hegemony, dominance, etc. will be the rule of the game. So I think for today, all of us need to make a decision. And the choice is not between China versus the United States. The choice is whether the United States is doing the right thing or the wrong thing. If the United States is doing the right thing, follow its leadership. If the United States is doing the wrong thing, do not follow the leadership. It's the same for China. If China is doing the right thing, go with China. If China does the wrong thing, do not go with China. And right now, I think the only litmus test is whether you are protecting or promoting free trade or whether you are disrupting or destroying free trade. This is a choice for everyone, for mankind as a whole. China's decision is to stand up to the occasion and fiercely defend free trade for itself as well as for the benefit of all the other countries. And that's why China is slapping 125% retaliatory tariff against the United States. And China has also declared at such high level of tariff, no U.S. goods exported to China will have any marketability, literally saying we are prepared for a complete breakup between China and the United States as far as trade is concerned. Now, for other countries, you may or may not have that courage or wisdom or vision to do what China is doing, but at least in your heart, you need to tell yourself which country is doing the right thing and which country is doing the wrong thing. China's position is also very clear. If you want to launch a war, if you want to impose a war on China, whether it is tariff war or trade war or scientific war or chips war or Cold War, proxy war or total war, China is always prepared to fight to the end, to defend itself, and in the case of the trade war and the tariff war, to defend free trade.
Well, let me immediately say that I have a great sympathy with what China is experiencing just now, in terms of the extraordinary high level of tariffs that are being applied by the United States. I think that is so much in defiance of the sort of World Trade Organization's way of doing business and so on. And I really do not think that economically it makes any sense to the United States or to the world. So let me make that clear from the start. I have my own problems in relation to China, because I think that here is this incredible power, and I think that it doesn't look after its own workers often well. I'm concerned about what happens in Xinjiang province, and I think there are issues about proper compensation of workers. And I don't like the idea of any kind of forced labor. And it surprises me that a nation like China, which is so concerned with doing justice by its many rather than its few, is doing that to any set of workers. So I have concerns about what happens in factories around China, and I have made that very clear. And so I'm a critic of China with regard to how it deals with minorities and how it deals with issues of rights and how it deals with the rule of law. But let's go back to the business of trade. I've always felt that we should keep doors open. I'm not a hawk when it comes to relationships with China. I think that Britain should be having discussions about trade. But I think that we've got to be very clear. And Victor, I suspect that you're going to disagree with me. But there's a difference. But I don't know about whether there's a difference anymore in the United States, but there's a difference in Britain with regard to the commercial world and the state. And the state does not have access into the private matters concerning a company. But you know that your governing body, the Communist Party of China, is able to access at any time, because of the power it wields, it's able at any time to access any kind of information that companies in China might hold in relation to those with whom it's doing trade. And so I do have concerns about whether doing trade with certain kinds of companies that are in China, whether in fact it is going to be deleterious to the national security of Britain. And I know that because of the different cyber invasions that there have been at the hands of China. And so I have concerns about that. And I do think that the door should be open to have continuing discussions with you around the issue of trade. I do think that it's very important that we continue to have close relations because of climate change and the ways in which there can be collaborations around all of that. And there are many different issues in the world where it's so important that a huge nation like China should be part of the great conversation of mankind. But I also have deep concerns about the fact that there isn't that separation of interests as between the private sector and the state of China as it's run by the Communist Party of China.
Victor?
Thank you very much. I listened very carefully to what Helena has to say, and I highly respect her as a person. On the other hand, for the several things she mentioned about, for example, forced labor, I hope Helena will really do better homework to realize that forced labor is not being practiced at all by any stretch of the imagination. And the complete transformation of China over the past 46 years is not because of forced labor, is not because of the false allegation about IPR violations, for example. So I hope people in Britain and elsewhere should really have a very objective look at China and try to understand what are the real driving forces between China's complete transformation. That's number one. Number two is that for people like Helena and all the other distinguished people, I treat all of you with great respect and decency, but we may have difference of opinion. So if you have criticism about China, be very straightforward. But criticism should be for the purpose of trying your best to help China to improve our situation, rather than condemning China, for example, or hold China as the culprit to humiliate it, because that's not constructive. So in that sense, I think when we talk about the trade war or the tariff war, we need to really make a final decision, whether in your heart or in the public, that is, whether you want to protect free trade. I think it's in all of us' interest to protect free trade. China is the largest trading partner with about 140 nations in the world. So we have a vested interest in promoting free trade. And we have a vested interest in telling the United States, telling President Trump and his administration, don't mess with China, don't mess with free trade, don't mess with mankind, don't try to be a hegemon who holds a gun at the head of the other countries and force it into kowtowing to the United States.
But do you see, when you hear the concerns of somebody like Helena Kennedy, do you see that in order to build more global alliance in this trade war, in this rivalry with America, China may have to address some of those concerns?
Allow me to emphasize for the record, that is, for all these decades, especially ever since 1978, and I have full knowledge of what China is doing for all these years, every day China is improving itself. Every day China is learning from its experiences, trying to understand why it failed, how it can move forward better. And whereas the United States is worried that they don't have enough enemies in the world, we are always worried that we do not have enough friends in the world. So what we call criticism and self-criticism is treated as a virtue in China. We always criticize ourselves, and we welcome positive, constructive criticism for anyone in the world. What we don't like is false accusation, is accusation without doing the homework, is confounding black and white, for example, and try to accuse China as the culprit, whereas the realities on the ground are completely different. So I think if Helena is really very constructively minded, and the goal is to help China to improve, Helena, you will be my heroine. And I think we will treat you with highest respect and decency. And I hope you will tell everyone you know that China welcomes positive, constructive criticism, but absolutely will fight against any false accusation and ungrounded condemnation.
Victor, you know that I'm a lawyer, but I'm a lawyer who's very much engaged with human rights issues, and I'm afraid I don't have very much truck with the idea that there are no human rights abuses being conducted against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang province, because I've seen too much of the evidence and I've heard too often from people who have been at the receiving end of persecution and have had to flee that persecution. Are they dealing with terrorism? Do you have collective punishments? Do you punish all of the people there in the ways that I think they are being punished? I'm happy to have those conversations with leading figures in China, but those things do alarm the West. Certainly the European West. I don't know whether they're causing great concern to either Russia or to the United States at the moment. But people in those countries also care about these issues. And so it seems to me that there's so many things that China could do. It could very easily say, we were trying to deal with, we felt, with terrorism, and it may be that we came down too heavily, and we're going to seek to address all of that, and we would like assistance in doing so. If China, for example, in relation to the Russia-Ukraine war, and which was started undoubtedly by Russia, if China took a position alongside Europe in supporting an end to that war that did justice for the Ukrainian people, then I think that that you would be creating a very different kind of perception of the journey that China is on in trying to address some of these issues. But there's no sign that that President Xi is interested in doing any of that.
Allow me to respond. I listened to you very carefully, Helena. You know, China is a nation with 56 different nationalities. Uyghur is one of the 56 different nationalities. So, to start with, you need to ask a question. Why, first of all the other 55 nationalities are very happy and very quiet, very law-abiding, and prospering together with the transformation in China, and why the Uyghur nationality has some problem. Now, then you also need to ask, what is the real problem involving some of the people in the Uyghur nationality? The reason is very simple. Xinjiang borders with Afghanistan. Just imagine if London borders with Afghanistan, then you will know immediately your risk profile will be completely different. And the 20-year war in Afghanistan, launched by the United States and participated by NATO, is a real thing. Afghanistan is still suffering from the aftermath of the 20-year-old war. And in Xinjiang, do you know, among the Uyghurs, there are people who call for jihad. Jihad against whom? Against China? No. Against the Chinese Communist Party? No. Against the Chinese people? No. Against the people like the Han nationality like me? No. They are calling for jihad against American troops occupying Afghanistan. They are calling for jihad against the NATO soldiers fighting in Afghanistan, including British soldiers. They were on the battleground. They killed the NATO soldiers, American soldiers. Some of them were arrested. Some of them were put into prison in Guantanamo Bay. All this is real. Don't pretend that you do not know. And as a result of that,
I do know.
Over. Allow me to finish. I listened to you very carefully just now without any
good.
interruption. Therefore, the spillover of terrorism, radicalization, and extremism from Afghanistan, from those people who want to launch jihad against America, against NATO, against British soldiers, for example, into Xinjiang is real. It's not pretended. It's not fabricated. If you say, no, China is immune from all these radicalization from Afghanistan into Xinjiang, then you do not know what you are talking about. So that's number one. Now, the second thing is very interesting. While terrorism, extremism, radicalization are what we consider evil forces, do you know what their real ultimate goal is? Their ultimate goal is to split Xinjiang into a separate independent country. They want to take away Xinjiang from China. And do you think the 1.4 billion people in China will ever tolerate such a prospect? Someone using whatever means they have at disposal, sometimes being fanned by some Western countries behind them, try to take away Xinjiang, 1/6 of the land mass of China. Now, when you talk about human rights problems, tell me whether you see any country in the world which has a perfect record of human rights. Every country has some problems, different in nature, different in degree, etc. When you say in China you have human rights problems, I agree with you. I want to work with you to see whether these human rights problems can be addressed. But when you say, wow, there are atrocities, there are crimes against humanity, there are other things, for example, you have mass detention of Uyghur people. No, Helena, you do not know what you are talking about. I actually met with the head of the World Uyghur Congress. And I met with the former chairman of the United States Congressional International Religion Committee, for example. Both of them were Uyghurs. We chatted. We can talk. We can exchange views. They know my view is completely different from them. They know they are getting the support. And both of them, actually, very interestingly, are U.S. citizens. They carry U.S. passport. But their goal is to really create a situation where ultimately, according to their version of the truth, that the Uyghurs will have their own homeland. Uyghurs will have their own republic, or Uyghurs will have their caliphate. Now, from Chinese perspective, this mission will never be possible. We will never allow that to be accomplished. So when you say, I support
what about the
Uyghurs,
point about Ukraine?
Ukraine is very simple. From day one, China has been calling for ceasefire, immediate ceasefire. China called Russia to ceasefire, China called on Ukraine to do the ceasefire. Now, people accuse China of siding with Russia and providing support to Russia. Allow me to mention one thing. If China provided weapons to Russia, the war would have been over already. Because if you know that China is the biggest producer of all these weapons of all kinds, etc. If China provides all these things to Russia, it will be one-sided. In addition to all the advantages and the superiorities that Russia.
So, are you denying that any Chinese weapons have gone to Russia?
No, there has been no Chinese weapon at all by any stretch of the imagination provided by China to Russia, because otherwise Russia would have won the war already. So we need to be very careful. China has been calling for ceasefire from day one. Second point, China has never provided any weapon to Russia. Thirdly, China has been treating Russia and Ukraine on the same footing, meaning we want to create a situation where both of them will need to sit down at the negotiation table. I would not be surprised eventually Beijing may be chosen as the venue for the most important Russian-Ukraine dialogue, maybe participated by Russia, by the United States at the same time.
Let me just ask Helen, I mean, you're part of you're the co-chair of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, which, and the members of that group often talk about the threats that China represents. Can you explain what you actually think the fear is, that what China's ambitions globally might be and what the threat to Britain is? Because that's what's leading to these conversations about Chinese involvement in British steel or nuclear plants and the question of whether they should be stopped.
I am not someone who thinks that China is the devil incarnate. I don't believe that. I know many Chinese people, and I've been to China a number of times, and I know, as Victor would say, many people are people of goodwill and so on. When Victor talks, my criticisms are different from those of, for example, some of the others who are on part of the alliance. My concerns are first of all about human rights, and I don't accept Victor's picture, which is that why the Uyghur, and I think it's a bit like people would say why the Irish, as if somehow there are some people who are more inclined towards terrorism. It's just not true. The problem in Xinjiang province is that, yes, I'm sure that there are jihadists, and I'm sure that there are people who want to live in a caliphate and are extremists and have been affected by the sort of Talibanization of creating a sort of political Islam. But those people are few. And I think the majority of people are absolutely wanting to live a peaceful life in Xinjiang province. They're not unhappy about being part of China if China respects them and respects their rights. And that's been my experience in my meeting with many of the Uyghur people. And so I don't accept this. The business is that terrorism and when the United States created this notion of a war on terrorism after 9/11, unfortunately, it gave excuses to other countries to go after the small numbers of people who might have those sort of jihadist views, to actually exact a much greater, if you like, punishment on the whole community in order to prevent the rise of it. I think that there are people who want, inside China, who want to be respected and to live as Muslims, to follow their religion and not to feel that they have to become like the Han. It's that sort of homogenization which seems to be part of President Xi's plan for China. Now, when Victor says, and he's a very smart man, so he knows that I will say this to him. When he says that the people, all the other provinces and all the other many peoples of minorities who are not Han Chinese, they all accept all of this and that they're happy. They're not. Many of them just get on with life quietly, knowing that because of the authoritarian nature of the regime, they couldn't possibly speak out, and they couldn't possibly insist on practicing their own religion or their own culture and so forth. And so it's about the fear. And that is what, I'm afraid, creates that culture of basically that chilling effect, which means that people just live their daily life and get on with it. And so I don't agree with him about the everybody else is happy. I do think that China has made the most incredible strides. It was a poor name, many people struggling, and the whole business of that advance over the decades since 1950 really has been incredible. However, to achieve that, there has been a great deal of repression, a cultural revolution, which was absolutely hellish for many, many families and people. And so, yes, now China has embraced the market. China is now wanting to play in the global market and to embrace large parts of capitalism. However, those things that I think make democracies work should be also making whatever China is running works, which is more rights for people, more participation, listening to their voices, and I believe elections. But Victor would say that's not possible in China. But I do feel very strongly that peoples who live on borders everywhere have this problem, which is that lines are drawn, which created nation states. And so there are often problems of this kind on borders where people feel, I'm culturally more like the folk on the other side of that border. And we're dealing with it in relation to Russian-speaking people in Ukraine and so forth. But there are ways of dealing with that. And one of the ways of dealing with it is not by repression, but by actually listening and allowing people to be as much of, what it is they want to be without doing it the way that I think is happening currently in China. But to go back to
could you also just explain, Helena, I mean, this question of sort of what the perceived threat from China is, as China becomes economically and militarily very strong, there is this sense of sort of, well, they are not the entirely innocent, just simply trading nation, and that they do pose a threat. So what is that perceived threat? Well,
first of all, we know that because of the huge numbers of people that there are inside the continent or the nation of China, they can very easily, they have a workforce that will work very cheaply, and that they can therefore undercut what's happening in other parts of the world. So that there's that whole competition, it's not an equality of arms. They can produce things much more cheaply, and therefore it is created for the United States and certainly for Western countries and for Britain ways in which products can be produced in a way that could never be produced for the cost that if they were made here. So that let's face that reality. The other thing is that the Chinese people are incredibly clever and very smart. They're very good at sort of seeing what other people are doing, adapting it and adopting it, and some would say stealing the intellectual property of others who've invented things. And so, but that has gone on not just with China, but China's very good at it. The other thing is that China, in its if you like, its Belt and Roads policies, have gone into Africa full of poor places, places that need infrastructure and so on. And it has been mopping up the friendship of nations. That helps them both at the United Nations to flatten criticism, but it also helps them in relation to securing some of the rare earth minerals that are very important in the creation of technology. And so let's be very clear, this is a strategy that China has adopted. And we have to be very wary of what it would mean for us. Because if China is buying up companies here in Britain, we have to, I mean, the business recently of the downturn of steel has concerned me, because for us that's very important, because it's taking jobs away from huge numbers of people, and if we don't have a capacity for making steel, it puts us at the mercies of buying steel from elsewhere. So we too have to be strategic. And so in being strategic, I think that we should be, and I've advocated this publicly, I think that we should be doing a review of all of the companies that we do business with, or that we might be thinking of doing business with, to look at and examine the potential for interfering with our own national security or our own national prosperity, actually. So I think that we need to know that. Now, what is different is that in Britain, certainly, when it comes to things like cybersecurity, companies operate separately. There is the state is not interfering, and I am confident of that but I'm not confident of it in relation to China. I think that China, for example, if it wanted to, could walk into any company and say, we want to see, you're doing stuff for health commodities in Britain. We'd like to see the data. Data has become one of the most valuable commodities in the world, much more valuable than gold or oil. Data is the future. And I'm afraid that China has long-term prospects in relation to acquiring our data because of how valuable it would be to them.
Okay, Victor, address some of that, but can you also just address the basic suspicion in Britain at the moment around British Steel, which is that it was clearly not in China's interest to make British steel flourish, and that you were in a position as a country to effectively sabotage a British industry?
I understand that the Chinese company running this British Steel faces a dilemma because the British Steel is losing money, tons of money on a daily basis. So commercially, you cannot support it. So the company either need to be nationalized by the British government or some other willing buyer need to take it over from the Chinese company. Now, there are many reasons why the company, British Steel, is losing money. But if you run a company, you will know that if you are faced with a situation where you keep pumping money in but still cannot revive it, then you need to reach a point of cut and run away from it. Is that right? So I don't think the situation involving British Steel has any geopolitical motivation behind it. It's purely an investment which doesn't work and becomes a liability, total liability. So I hope Britain actually will make sure that the furnaces will never be closed. You still have some iron or steel making capabilities just in case for any exigencies, for example. But to imagine that China as a country has a secret agenda of moving into British Steel and shut the furnace and create a situation where Britain will have no steel making capacity, that's too much of a Hollywood movie. That's too much of exhaust on your imagination, I would say. So my personal view is let British Steel be saved and let Britain still keep whatever amount of steel making capacities. But the financial failure of this British Steel has nothing to do with the Chinese government, has nothing to do with whether China wishes Britain good or bad. Now, allow me to use the other one, Hinkley nuclear power station. China was very much involved, and China was very happy to work with a French company to get this nuclear power station down. Britain suffered all the hysteria, eventually created a situation where the Chinese company was forced out. But eventually you end up with a situation where the French company can no longer support it because it's too much of a burden, financial burden. So Britain is hit with the failure of Hinkley, and I think it will suffer a shortage of power in the coming years at a time when the Americans keep telling you power, power, power is the key in the AI age. You need to have at least double the current power capacity to support a meaningful AI industry. So eventually, Britain suffers all the consequences. You no longer have enough power to support your current use, and you will have a big shortage of power if you really want to commit yourself to an AI revolution. Now, very briefly, I do not have enough time to address all the points Helena mentioned. Oppression. Let me tell you, if you talk about China with billions, 1.4 billion people in oppression without being able to express their views, why is it the case that China produces more data than anyone else? Chinese language data is probably one of the largest pool of data in the world of today. How do you explain that China's mobile phone and laptop and computer penetration are among the highest in the world, of people to chat freely without any concerns about each other? But if you say whether in China there is a red button issue that you cannot talk about, which are considered political taboo, of course every country has a red button issue. In China, what is on the red button issue list? Tibetan independence, Xinjiang independence, Hong Kong independence, Taiwan independence. You cannot challenge the one-party state. More or less, China is a democracy in its own way. We, in addition to the Communist Party of China, we have 8 other democratic parties which started their existence before 1949. And then, if you talk about people, Helena, come to Beijing, come to any part of China. You see free movement of people back and forth. Now people from the west to the east, from the south to the north, and vice versa on the high-speed railway. And I never see any such convenience of public transformation, movement of goods, services, and ideas across multiple applications. That's why TikTok in the United States is so popular. That's why so many applications are very popular in the United States, in Western countries, in the global South. Why? Because they started in China. They have proven their mettle in China. Therefore, they went to the rest of the world. If you think China is a country of oppression, do you think you can really come up with an app like TikTok? So if you want to criticize China for the purpose of helping China improve, you'll be welcome. If you want to use all these stereotypes and labels, which completely are not applicable to China, then my advice is, Helena, maybe next time when I'm in London, we can have a cup of tea to help you to really being reoriented to the realities in China. China
Victor,
is the mega trend in the world.
Victor, can I just tell you? I'm just going to tell you that I take my hat off to the sheer ingenuity of the Chinese people. That the cleverness and the inventiveness is to be greatly admired. But I do want you to know that I can't come and visit you in Beijing as you're inviting me to do, and you're saying I'd be very welcome. You might put the welcome mat out for me, but I'm afraid I've been sanctioned by the Chinese. The Chinese government.
Why? Then you need to ask why. Why should China sanction you, Helena Kennedy?
I'll tell.
Why?
I know perfectly well why they sanctioned me. They sanctioned me because, as a parliamentarian, along with Lord Alton in the House of Lords, he and I were both highly critical of what was happening to the Uyghur people in Xinjiang province, and I was also very critical of what was happening to the rule of law in Hong Kong. And but 5 members of the House of Commons were also sanctioned, and it was about freedom of speech, you see. And I think freedom of speech isn't operative in China. And so when people in Britain, even parliamentarians who are protected with what they say in Parliament, when we were talking about what was going on there, that made us alien to the regime in China, and I'm afraid I've been sanctioned. So I can't visit my friends in China. I can't visit and see the wonderful art. I can't go and see the beauties of China because I'm banned from China. And so I just want you to know that it's a source of serious sadness to me. But I'm not going to be able to take up your very kind.
Helena, allow me to make a point. You mentioned the freedom of speech. I am, as a Chinese national, sitting in my home in Beijing, talking with you.
But are you shocked that Helena is banned?
I hope eventually sanctions against you will be removed and you will be welcome to China. But there is a precondition, I would say. That is, really deal with China as it is, without blowing things out of proportion, and deal with China as it is, deal with the Chinese people as it is, deal with a person like Victor Gao as I am.
We must wrap it up, I'm afraid. But thank you very much indeed, both of you. Thank you, Baroness
Thank you,
Kennedy, Victor Gao. Thank you both very much indeed.